The Earnestly Speaking podcast is a show that is founded on free-flowing conversation and may at times venture into mature subjects. Listener discretion is advised.
Earnestly podcast here with old friend of the pod, host of Locked On Heat podcast, David Ramil here. What's up? It's been almost a year.
Has it? I didn't realize it's been that long.
Look at the log here on Skype, and the last pod we did was July last year, shortly before the start of the restart.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, I remember that conversation. We were both kind of, I think I was more down than you were about the whole prospect of restarting the season because it felt like such a money grab, and a year later, here we are.
Yeah, and I think we actually did try to do a pod after he went to the finals, but it was scheduling conflicts.
Yep.
So, it's you know how it is. Anyway, it's been about a week and a half since the Miami Heat got eliminated for the playoffs. Obviously, you probably should be talking about this because it's depressing to see how everything fell apart. What the hell happened, man? Just tell me what happened to this team.
Well, I'm not depressed about it, to be honest with you. I was expecting more out of this team, and I think that was part of the problem, right, is that based on what I had seen and all of us had seen in Jimmy Butler last year, we kind of glossed over a lot of the very obvious problems with this construction of the team. Like we go back to the offseason, and they didn't make any major moves. Obviously, Pat wanted to keep flexibility in the salary cap, and they didn't want to acquire a big player. He let a guy like Jay Crowder go away, a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. go away. And, you bring in guys on 1-year deal, and it's not exactly the kind of talent addition that makes this team better. In fact, it makes it significantly worse. And so they kind of just go through this really difficult season, and you're kind of chalking it up to all these valid excuses as to why they might be bad. The fact that, Jimmy was hurt, and then that he missed so much time because of health and safety protocols, and that there were inconsistencies in the lineup all year long. And you kind of think to yourself, well, they'll finally get it together. They'll finally turn it around. And, there's this shadow of the whole trade scenarios and everything else, like players that were struggling whether or not they were going to get traded. Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, like their names were linked in trades all year long. That's a lot of pressure for young players still trying to, get a footing in the NBA. And so all these things are piling up. And again, Miami's struggling. They're not particularly good. They finally claw their way out of 7 games below 500, and they start to get somewhat respectable. And Jimmy starts playing well. In fact, garnering some serious consideration as an MVP level type player. And you kind of think to yourself, well, then they'll figure it out. They're going to get better. Jimmy's going to do what he did in the playoffs and finals last year. Everything's going to be fine. And then they go up against a team like Milwaukee that's significantly more talented. And on top of that, had a huge, motivation to try and knock off Miami after, seeking actual revenge for last year in the playoffs. And it was just too much. And then my feeling is that they got hit. They couldn't find a way to fight their way out of the situation. They just couldn't seem to get any kind of stability. They couldn't get any one player couldn't get going against this Milwaukee team. And by that point, you're in a 3-0 deficit, even back at home. And you think to yourself, we just can't do this. They just ran out of energy. And I think everything piled up. That you think about everything that happened to this team over the last year and a half. They had to compress 2 full seasons into a very short amount of time. They went on a longer run than anybody else. And we saw what happened with the Lakers too. Injuries, mental exhaustion, all these things take their toll. And it was pretty obvious that Miami just couldn't cope with that. And they just lost it. I think they just lost control of a series where they were clearly outmatched. And that was just enough for them to say, you know what? Let's just stop. We can't go any further. We can't do anything else. We'll have a full off season. We'll regroup next season and see what happens.
Which now begs the question. You just mentioned the Lakers also flaming out too. 3 of 4 teams that made the conference finals last year will bounce out in the first round. Boston, Miami, of course, and the Lakers. Now, who would have thought of the 4 teams that Denver would be the one that survived?
Yeah. No, especially with Jamal Murray's injury too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is why Jokic deserved MVP, in my opinion, but that's another topic. So which now begs the question: Can we call what the bubble was a fluke? Because I have 2 arguments to that. Like, I can see the argument saying it's a fluke because of the situation, not just for Miami, but for, quite frankly, any team that made a substantial gains in a bubble. the Lakers. Obviously, one of the arguments I used was that many people use also is the fact that Anthony Davis is able to get healthy, do that break through COVID, and then which actually propelled them to the title. You know, I don't know. Like, I don't want to say the fluke because the circumstances were what they were, but at the same time, it's I don't know. It's a weird situation. Do you acknowledge that it's a fluke, or do you think it's just
I don't like the way.
real?
Yeah, I don't like the way the fluke is being used. It's like being used as a pejorative to insult and denigrate the level of play and everything else. And that's not exactly fair, because that's also factually incorrect in that there was no fluke to this. Every team had the opportunity. Now, that's what's being ignored there, is that the circumstances of the Orlando bubble are available to everybody. And Miami simply found a way to be better than everybody else, with the exception of the Lakers. And so maybe there were elements of that were unusual, but that's the word that they should be using. It's an unusual circumstance. At the same time, what we've seen from all the teams that were in the bubble, the fact that they were able to take advantage of the opportunity to not have to travel, to not have the advantages of a home crowd and the officiating that gets swayed by a home crowd, to be able to deal with the real mental exhaustion of the Orlando bubble and still find a way to triumph over everybody else. I mean, to me, that should be an asterisk in the positive favor. Like, asterisks are used to kind of denigrate a season or to demote a season, as far as like maybe it wasn't as good as a year in the past. But to me, the reality is I think the challenges were even harder. It was the purest form of basketball that we've seen. Again, no travel, no unfair advantages for any one team. For Miami to prove that they could be better than everybody else, I think makes them a very special group. At least that the way that team was comprised and the mental fortitude it took for them to get as far as they did, they just took advantages that were available to them. And look, I've talked about this a lot recently, and a great point was made to me. When isn't that the case? Like, should we take away the Raptors championship from a couple of years ago because Kevin Durant got hurt? Or, when the Cleveland Cavaliers won, when, they were missing a couple players due to suspension and injury and things of that sort. Like, every team takes advantages of whatever circumstances are there. If you're going to start using the bubble and put an asterisk next to that, you might as well put one next to any championship, because they all take advantages of whenever they present themselves. There's always injury. There's always something, bad calls. I mean, go down the line. There's just no way of separating when there's an advantage that takes place and when a team takes advantage of that opportunity. That's just every team every year. And so to me, it's kind of unfair to insult what the Heat accomplished because they were able to take advantage of those opportunities.
Right. So that being said, what's your opinion on the Heat going forward, at least for this offseason? What's out there? Is there a whale to attain? Do they keep this team, in your opinion, for another year? I mean, this is the finals team. This team went to the finals last year. So clearly it's shown that it can do some big things when the possibility presents itself. Is there a whale out there they can get? What's the next step for this team? What is the cap situation, really, be honest with you? Because it's a lot of things that for example, there was a lot of talk last year after the bubble that they want to stay flexible because they want to go after Giannis. Right. And all of a sudden Giannis gets extended by Milwaukee in December. Mm-hmm. That came out of nowhere. What's the next step for this Heat team? Like, do they keep this team together one more year? Do you say that Tyler Herro's sophomore slump was a slump and he'll bounce back next year? Or what do you think they do going forward?
I don't think they can afford to wait another year. They can't just run it back. And I think based on what Pat Riley told media at his end of season presser, I think that's not their intention. Now, I just don't realistically know what moves are available to them. You trust that between Andy Ellisberg and Pat Riley and everybody else in that front office, they'll figure something out. They'll bring in an undrafted free agent that might turn out to be a really good addition. They'll not sign guys that, probably overachieved in Miami because of their coaching and the system and everything else. And I think they'll be able to build more depth there. I look, a lot of that also falls on how players around the league view this team and whether or not they want to play in Miami and want to play for Coach Spoelstra and want to play alongside Jimmy and Bam. That's a big part of it. Like, they have to agree to join Jimmy's team. They're not going to be coming to this team and saying they're going to take over. Like, I don't think there's any superstar out there that's willing to take a pay cut just to join this version of the Heat team like they have in years past. So it's going to be tricky. You have to see if you can maybe get more. To me, I think they have to build more depth, because what was kind of exposed in the playoffs was just how they didn't have any kind of really solid playmaker or a person that can create space and create their own shot. When defense was as good as Milwaukee's was against Miami, they didn't take advantage of those shot opportunities when they did have them. So they need some more depth in that sense. They can't keep relying on older vets like Trevor Ariza and Dwayne Dedmon. As good as those might have been on occasion, they just weren't playable in the playoffs either. And so you need more quality depth. And I'd like to go younger too. I think for the Heat perspective, they want to be able to add more young talent, more young depth there. I'm just not sure how much of that is available. And so you know that Riley's going to always swing for the fences. If there's a superstar to be had, they'll explore every opportunity. I think probably top for them would be probably to add Kawhi Leonard based on how he's viewed by that franchise. But I don't know if they also want the headache that comes with a guy like Kawhi and everything that happens behind the scenes.
Right.
Second to that, probably Dame Lillard. If he demands a trade and if he wants to come to Miami, those things have to be aligned. Other than that, you probably re-engage Washington for a Bradley Beal trade. Other than that, you probably go after Kyle Lowry or somebody else.
Right. All right. Bam Adebayo. Phenomenal talent. This is his third year, I think, now, or fourth year. This past. Whatever. Bottom line, phenomenal talent. Does feel like there's something missing. The next step. I don't know. I feel like he's been given the keys to the kingdom, and he's not quite just taking it. And I'm not sure it's because he can't do it, or he doesn't want to do it. Feels like he holds himself back. Because even though this is Jimmy's team, we agree it's Jimmy's team. But Jimmy's also said, you have the keys. Go ahead, take over. You're the best player on the team. He's told him that many times publicly. What is the next step for Bam Adebayo to be? I mean, what's the next step for him in terms of, okay, could he be, I don't know, because his talent level, I can see him being a top 15, top 10 player if he plays his cards right.
Right.
What's missing with Bam now?
He has to be able to take that leap mentally, I think. I've had this discussion a lot with guys that cover the Nuggets, and it's a good example in Nikola Jokic and the fact that he had to raise his game up to another level. He was a lot like Bam when he first came in the league, and that he was a pass-first guy, and that's part of what makes him so special now is that he figured out how to blend his offense alongside his own scoring with trying to get other guys going. And I think that's still the hard part for Bam is realizing that he's an integral part of trying to get everybody else's offense going, guys like Duncan and things of that sort. And maybe it's something coaching. And maybe it's a matter of if Duncan leaves in free agency, then you kind of just rebuild how you run the offense and you make Bam more of an aggressive score first kind of guy. And if that's the case, then maybe he can get to that point where he's a 25 point per game scorer. Because I think that's certainly a possibility given his talent. I mean, you talked about it. I mean, that talent level is certainly there. Top 15-ish kind of talent, I think. Maybe not quite MVP, because Jokic has a 3-point shot that I'm not sure Bam will ever have. But that's to me, the next step is just looking to score first and then try to get other guys going. And that's just not how he's utilized right now. And I don't know if he's necessarily how he feels comfortable. So both of those things have to shift. They have to kind of rerun their offense where they want him to score and not necessarily try to get guys like Duncan going. And look, that's partly on Duncan too. Like Duncan can't create his own shot. So he has to rely on somebody like Bam Adebayo. And sure, it's successful, but when you have nobody else in that starting lineup that can create their own shot, then it becomes problematic. And I think that's what we saw this season.
Right. All right. Well, another narrative since the season ended is Jimmy Butler. We're 2 years into the Jimmy Butler experience. Obviously, it's been a success for the most part. We're now hearing about him possibly getting another extension, another max contract.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler is now what, 32?
I think 31, yeah.
31, 32.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of opinions on this one. I love Jimmy. I think he's the perfect extension of Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra. I think you and I said this even before we got him, that the fit was perfect.
Yep.
But this is also a guy that, should he get this extension, this is going to go into his mid-30s. Now, I'm not saying he won't be good in his mid-30s, but, there's some risk there.
Yeah.
So, let me ask you a question. Is it smart for the Heat to lock him up now?
I think it's almost like two different questions. And I think they're going to do it. And I also don't think it's the right or the smart move. It's not the safe move. It's also a move they have to do because they're trying to build goodwill. And I think they're so grateful to Jimmy for coming to this franchise and raising the ceiling of this team so considerably. After Dwayne retired and everything else, they were looking for an identity. Jimmy comes in and he provides it right away. And so it enables the kind of moves where you can trade a guy like Hassan Whiteside, you could trade Dion, Justice, and everybody else because, you don't need him. You've got Jimmy now. He's your guy. And I think the gratitude is there. My feeling, and I don't have any reporting on this, is that I think they'll talk to his agent, see if he's willing to take less so they can have more flexibility, more maneuverability. But I think Jimmy's going to tell him, no, I want that max. And it's part of the status of the NBA where you've got to get that big contract. You got to be, he wants to be paid as a max player. Like he's already a max player now, but he wants to get that super max deal. And I think he'll get it. I also don't think it's the right move because, like you said, he's going to be older, and I don't know that his game is going to age the way a player like Dwayne's did, and that's the comparison, right? And we know that Jimmy relies on getting to the line, but in the Milwaukee series, he didn't. And so if he can't create his own shot, he doesn't have a reliable three-point shot, and he's older now, he's not going to be taking the kind of beating that it takes to draw those fouls constantly. Where's the offense going to be coming from? Is he still going to be able to lead the league in steals at 36th? I don't think so. I can't see that as a realistic possibility. So there's a risk involved. You just have to hope that other moves raise the bar for this team too, and that Jimmy, at whatever version they get at 36, is still good enough to help compete for a title.
Random question here real quick. We know James Harden got traded to Brooklyn early in the year.
Yep.
How close were the Heat actually to getting him? Because we hear all these rumors about all it took was throwing Tyler Herro in the deal, and the Heat said no and all this stuff. And I don't know, man. Was this James Harden thing really really going to happen? How close were this going to happen? Actually, going to happen at the time?
Pretty not to the point where it was one bad phone call away or anything like this, but they were in active discussions once it became obvious that Harden wanted out of Houston. They engaged the Rockets, and look, remember they went through a change in their front office too. So they were dealing with Raphael Stone, the general manager over there, and kind of hoping they could take advantage of his relative naivete as a first-year GM, and it didn't work out. He stuck to his guns. He wanted more draft picks than what Miami had, and I think it didn't necessarily come down to whether or not you're willing to throw Tyler Herro in there. But if it was Tyler Herro plus another pick or Duncan and another pick, and they just didn't have the other pick to throw in there, so they didn't have the total package sweet enough to make a move. And I think that's where things tend to break down for them. And I think, look, it's if anything, the fact that they were able to engage the Rockets later on in the season to acquire Victor Oladipo kind of shows how far along those calls probably got, that there was an existing relationship there. And it's always like, we kind of always forget this, is that these deals don't happen overnight. There are weeks and weeks of conversation and going back and forth and saying, well, why don't you throw this guy in? And you have to have like a good relationship there, a good rapport between these two front offices. And I think it shows over the course of the season that they did have a relationship because they were able to re-engage in talks later on for Oladipo, and they got the deal they wanted. It only cost them, Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk. And I think it was a good deal for Miami. Unfortunately, it didn't pay off because of Oladipo's injury, right. But they were pretty close. They were pretty close to seeing if they could at least acquire a player like Harden. They were in on Harden. They wanted to make the move, and I think that's a good indicator for how this team views themselves, that they want to be able to bring in that next superstar to compete for a title. And look, Harden's the best option there. Like, as good as Dame is, as much as I love Lillard, as good as Bradley Beal is, Harden just, even with the injuries now, he raises this team up to another level that they just don't have, that they haven't had since the Heatles.
You mentioned Victor Oladipo.
Yeah.
Percentage chance he's back on this roster next year?
25.
Ooh, low. That's that low, huh?
Yeah, I just you bring him in, right? And you hope that he's going to show enough. The risk of injury is always going to be there. I just don't think he's ever going to get past that. Like, he can slow his game down or age a little bit and become a little bit more cautious, maybe get lucky. We've seen players like Sean Livingston change their role even though they went through terrible injury. But with Oladipo, he's just rushed it back every time. And so I think they're cautious about what he can do. They made this connection with Oladipo, brought him on there because, one, Oladipo wanted to, and he fit what Miami was looking to do, And so he was a good addition. And now you kind of just say, look, we're glad you were part of this team. If you want to come back, that's great. We'd love to have you. We'll be patient with you while you rehab and everything else. But realize we're not going to throw a lot of money your way. If you want to go out after money, and that's what your priority is at this point in your career, given everything that you've gone through injury and everything else, and you can find a better deal out there, go for it. So I think they're in a good bargaining posture as far as whether or not they can bring him back. At least that's the way I view their perception around the front office there. So I think if it's up to Oladipo and he can get a bigger deal somewhere else, he'll probably take that, because you got to secure the bag now, because it's unrealistic that he'll be able to get another long-term contract at any point. So if some team, I don't know what team that might be, is throwing him a 3-year deal somewhere, he'll take it. But if Miami offers him a 1+1, where he comes back in November, December, he's fully rehabbed at this point now, and he's a legitimate contributor next year at a pretty cheap deal, then he opts out of that second year of his deal, enters free agency again, and maybe he'll re-sign in Miami, or maybe he'll go anywhere else. But
Right.
that's the wise move, I think, for the team, is to just offer him that 1-and-1 deal where he has to prove himself yet again, and if he proves himself, then he'll get paid.
Last Heat-related question. Now you attended Pat Riley's end of the season presser, as he does every year.
Yeah.
What is the vibe you got from Pat Riley in terms of his future? Like, how much longer do you think he's doing this? Like, does he seem revigorated? Because we thought a couple years ago that maybe he's done the end of the road, and then all of a sudden he felt revigorated. We got Jimmy, and they went to the finals last year and all that. What kind of vibe did you get from Pat Riley about how much longer he's going to do this?
I think he's still got a few years left, to be honest with you. Like, he's not gonna show any obvious sign of weakness. I think he's at a point where he's polished enough and aware enough that even when he's on a Zoom call, something he's unusual, kind of very unfamiliar with, he still is not going to show any overt sign of weakness. But to me, I get the vibe that he's still in it for a long time, that he wants to continue to turn this team around. And again, I think they feel indebted to Jimmy, and they promised him a championship when he signed that 4-year deal. And I think they'd like to deliver on that promise. And so whatever it's going to take to make sure they can put this team in a position to compete for a title, he's going to try and do. Now, I mean, again, it takes two to tango, so he has to find a willing partner. You know that Pat's history is always going to be, one that, again, tries to acquire a big name in order to make this a championship caliber level team. But I just don't know how realistic that is. He loves the pursuit of those players. He loves to be engaged in that. And he loves seeing the guys on this roster, continue to develop. I think he's a big fan of Kendrick Nunn and Duncan and Tyler, and I think he wants to see them thrive. But I think he's also realistic enough to say, you know what, if they have to go elsewhere in order to find their pot of gold, go ahead. And he'll find somebody else, because that's just who he is. So I think that's still part of it, is that he wants to bring a championship to Jimmy, and he'll stick around until he can get that done. So their next title, I could see him finally trying to step away from that. I think last year's finals run, not necessarily a fluke again, but it was something unexpected. They did not think internally that they were going to be able to coalesce this well, this quickly, and go all the way to the finals. And plus, nobody saw COVID happening even early in the season. Nobody saw a hiatus. Nobody saw a bubble. I mean, it was just a very strange time, obviously. It still is. And I think Pat just kind of wants to get it back, right? Like, he wants to run it back. He wants to be able to feel that juice again. So to me, he's got a few years left.
And he's only 76.
I mean,
he's only 76.
He's also done it right. Like, he's 76, but you saw a younger guy in Danny Ainge kind of burn out. And you wonder what the hell was going on there, where age, Ainge couldn't handle it, even though he's younger than Riley. Riley, I think, conversely, like, he has such a good team around him, he doesn't have to be as active as day to day. And look, before the pandemic, if they were practicing at American Airlines Arena, there's this table that they have in the practice arena, and it's Mickey Harrison, it's Pat Riley, it's Andy. The whole crew's there. They're just watching, interacting. Spoke comes by there after practices and talks to Pat for a little bit and kind of, give him his input and stuff like that. So he still loves this. I think he really still loves being around the guys and being around the coaching, just everything. Like, he loves every aspect of the game. So he's still young at heart, if nothing else.
All right, let's talk a little playoffs real quick.
Right.
What stood out to you so far in the playoffs? We're second round now. I don't know. It's been fun playoffs, actually. I mean, aside from the Heat and, their asses kicked. It's actually been a very interesting playoff. It especially with the Lakers being gone now too, it really feels wide open. Yeah, I know Brooklyn's dominating. I still got questions, even though they've been dominating Milwaukee the first two games, though. What stood out to you so far?
It really is Brooklyn, though. I got to be honest with you. Like, they're just really good. Like I think, like you, I think everybody had questions about whether or not their defense was going to be good enough. Can they continue to outscore teams? And look, they're missing James Harden, and they're still mopping the floor
It's insane.
with Milwaukee. Like you can't imagine that happening where you lose your third best player, your second best player, maybe even your best player. You're like, oh, that's okay. We're still able to score at will. We can do anything we want to. And look, they're getting incredible contributions from Blake Griffin and others that they didn't expect. But man, that's a really, really good team. Phoenix has also impressed me. I think they've just kind of turned it around. They've shown real promise all year long, and you can't achieve the record that you do. But look, I mean, not to slander Milwaukee, but we've seen enough over the past from them and other teams where you can be really good in the regular season, and that doesn't mean shit when you come to the playoffs. So I think now Phoenix is really showing that they've got some legitimate players on that team. Guys like Booker, guys like Mikal Bridges, and of course Chris Paul. I mean, they've got a good, really talented crew over there. Those are the things that have stood out to me the most so far. I'm not sure about the Clippers, whether or not they're realistic, whether or not they can challenge Utah. Utah's really good. In the East, I feel like it's a kind of like a foregone conclusion that Brooklyn is going to wind up advancing all the way to the finals, and it's just who they're going to meet on the other side. A Phoenix-Brooklyn matchup would be pretty interesting, and I kind of see that's how it's heading. I mean, you could make a case maybe it's Utah, but I don't know if Utah is good enough.
So you don't trust the Clippers, do you? You don't trust them, huh?
I don't see them pulling it together. They've just been so inconsistent, and I keep seeing the same issues from them. You know, and it's like Kawhi is an incredible player, but we keep coming down to the same thing, that they're just missing like an emotional leader on that team, and they kind of make a change, they make a trade for a guy like Rajon Rondo to help, and that's okay, but it's also not good enough to really carry your team. They're missing a Kyle Lowry type figure, which is why Kawhi was able to win in Toronto. So. I don't know. They're good. They're really, really good. But, also Paul George is just a mess out there, and he just cannot seem to get any kind of consistent offense. And he just always seems to falter when the team needs him most. And they were able to hold their own with Utah in game one, but for the most part, I just don't know if I don't know what they've got left. Oh, I counted them out against Dallas too, and they surprised me. So maybe they'll get another transcendent, performance from Kawhi. They kind of have to, right? If he's as great as he can be, then maybe he can help carry them past Utah. But I don't know how realistic that is either, because Utah's very good.
Yeah. No, we mentioned Nikola Jokic early in the podcast. You won MVP. Did he get it right?
I think so. You made a great point, though. I saw, I think it was a tweet from you where you mentioned, like, now you can't say that there's any one player that stood out.
One definitive player. I was gonna mention that in a second too, because for the first time in decades, the only time I can remember really where there was no clear cut best player was the year Jordan retired, and then Olajuwon claimed that months later. You know what I'm saying? Winning the first title.
94.
Other than that, there's never been a time in my life where I felt that there was not a clear cut best player. I actually mapped out something on Facebook to a 40-year sample, who was the best player from this era to this time and who took over. The only time I felt like it was even close to having a period of like a few months where it was in the year was the minute Jordan retired in October 93. And then Elijah close to that.
It's different, though. Like, it feels like, I think we're seeing a redefining of what makes an MVP. And I think the fact that Jokic was recognized by voters is kind of a step forward. And to your point about whether or not there's any one player that stands out over any else, it's just, I feel like players have to be so much more good in the sense that they have to be versatile. You can't just be a 35 point per game scorer, because look at Bradley Beal. Like, Bradley Beal's phenomenal, but he's pretty one-sided, right? He's not a great defender. He never really has been. And although he's a good playmaker, that was not what he was asked to do this year. He was just a scorer. As good a scorer as he is, I don't think anybody has him in the MVP consideration. Like, did he get votes? Yeah, but he's not really a legitimate MVP. Even a guy like Embiid, as good a scorer as he is, has to be a really, really good defender. And for Joker, he has to be a real good playmaker,
Right. Which to Embiid's credit, he is a good defender. And I don't know. You can mention 7 to 8 guys, honestly, that right now are the best from the league, and it wouldn't sound silly. Like, you can still say LeBron, and it's not the wrong answer.
No,
not clear cut anymore.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
KD. I mean, Harden.
He might be the one. But you also said versatility. Two things. Versatility is one thing you mentioned there. Also, availability. The reason why I can't put Durant quite there yet is because he's missed time the last couple of years. He's missed the entire last year. He missed a chunk of this year. Kawhi misses back-to-backs. You know, the only guy, honestly, right now that I would even lean in right now will be Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, but even he kind of feels more like that same kind of
right.
You know, Bradley Beal type, or he's a score first guy, right? Or he's a good playmaker, obviously, but I think his defense is so subpar that it's going to take him out of that conversation, at least for now. I think he'll get his due eventually, but I also think that there's a tendency not to give a young player that kind of acknowledgement that quickly, that he kind of has to go through the paces. I feel like if he does this for another 2 years, then he'll get more legitimate voting there. But outside of that, I think right now they're not going to award a guy in, what is it, his third season? Like, it's unbelievable that he's putting up these kind of, like, Bam's in his fourth year. If Luka's in his third year, and he's already, like, legitimately a top, 7? Like, where do you separate where is he? A top 7 player?
I was saying top 7 last year. Now it's shrunk into probably top 5, top 3, honestly. Because, again, it comes down, but again, the 7 people like I mentioned, like if I mentioned Kawhi, LeBron, you know, all those guys, you can make a case for any of those guys being in any order, because the problem is availability is one of the big issues. Like you want to say Kawhi, but you can't because of availability. You want to say Durant, but you can't because of availability. Now Durant, I will say, I would argue that if he stays healthy, he's probably the clear cut guy. You know, and look at the way he's playing in these playoffs, especially too.
Yeah.
But to me, the only guy in that bunch that's been able to stay "quote unquote" healthy is Luka, and he's showing out in the playoffs too with a roster that Giannis is so discombobulated. Honestly,
Giannis looked pretty good too.
Yeah. I
think he's MVP worthy. I think he kind of, like, the way Milwaukee played during every season. Now MVP talk is always really difficult for me because I can never separate, like, whether it's the player who drives this team to success or the team. And like you look at the Bucks, and Giannis is their best player, but you've also got other all-star level players like Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, and a good supporting cast, and they play defense well, and all these things on and on and on. So it's like they have a lot. Everybody seems to say, oh well, they don't win enough as a team, and I get that, but you can't carry a team singularly to victory. Like, you're not going to achieve great success. I think the best case for that is probably like LeBron early in his career when he was carrying really bad teams. And I think a big part of that is also kind of similar to what we see from Luka, is like they are the sole generator for those teams on offense. Like, the ball is in Luka's hands so much that he controls so much of what's going on. Partly why Kristaps Porzingis isn't happy with his role there is because Luka always has the ball in his hand, and he gets to dictate, like, who has the ball, who scores, and who gets the opportunities. And most often than not, he's calling his own number. He looks off guys way too much, and I'm sure that rubs players the wrong way. So as much as you want to play with a guy like Doncic because he's fun to watch and he's exciting, you never know what's going to happen. The ball is going to be in his hands more often than not, and whether or not you get it is probably going to be a concern for you.
Unless they attach a draft pick to a trade, he's stuck in Dallas, right?
Who, Porzingis?
Yep.
Oh, I mean, that contract, I talked about this in a recent episode. It's brutal. But I talked myself into, I listed pros and cons, and I'm like, oh, he's 25. And he's been hurt a lot, but he's also in his 7th year, which we kind of forget. He came into the league so early, 18.
Was he the Justice Winslow draft, I think?
Yeah. I mean, Winslow's fighting for his NBA life here, and Porzingis is getting paid $30-something million to be, maybe your third best player. So he has to kind of also come to the realization that he's not going to be the guy he was early in New York. He's not going to be a 25 point per game scorer, and he has to change his role and his mindset and just take advantage of the opportunities where they do come. And that's part of the issue too, is that he doesn't give this 100% effort because he doesn't embrace his role. And I'm starting to more as I cover this league. It's like guys have to realize what their roles are realistically and embrace them and figure out how to star in those roles, because you're not going to just transform yourself into the best player of your team. Like, that's just not realistic. And so you have to figure out what you do well, what the team needs you to do well, and embrace it and figure it out. And I just don't think Porzingis is there yet. He's 25. Right. He thinks he's a star, and he's also playing alongside, to your opinion, a top 5 guy in the league. And so he has to kind of change his perspective a little bit because he's not going to take over the Mavericks anytime soon.
Right. Last thing, I'll let you go. Last thing.
Right.
This year's NBA Finals will be blank.
Brooklyn, obviously, and I'm leaning Phoenix. Yeah,
you really are big on Phoenix. Huh? This is Chris Paul's time.
That would be great. I mean, and he's not even their best player, and I like the fact that he's kind of getting that consideration. I don't like the way it's swayed so completely. Like he was kind of underrated for years because he couldn't get past the first round and all this stuff, and it was kind of ridiculous to hold that against him. Again, none of his fault. He was either injured or he had bad teams or things has happened to those groups. But it wasn't because Paul was a bad player. But I'm glad he's getting the recognition the other way, where now you saw what he did in Oklahoma City last year. You see what he does this year with a team like Phoenix that doesn't have any kind of playoff experience, and he's able to really help them and transform them into a group that believes in themselves. So I'm a believer. Right now, they're leading the Nuggets even as we're recording this. So I think they have a good chance of building a 2-0 lead in that series. We'll see what happens when they go back to Denver. Maybe the Nuggets will find a way to even it out, but it should be an interesting Western Conference playoff match. I think Brooklyn's going to kind of run away with it. I think Philadelphia might be able to come back in Atlanta now that they've kind of figured out defensively what they need to do. They're fun,
aren't they?
Philadelphia or Atlanta?
Atlanta. They're fun.
They were. Yeah, they were in game 1. In game 2, not so much. They kind of fell apart a little bit there.
Yeah, I will say about Chris Paul real quick. He may not be the best player on the team, but he's definitely the most important player right now.
Yeah, that's fair. Look, I mean, we saw this with the Raptors a couple years ago. Like Lowry, not their best player by far. You could make a case that Siakam was better than Lowry for most of the season. They certainly had Kawhi and had other young guys that stepped up and everything else, but he's a guy that makes them tick. He makes them run. You know, the straw that stirs the drink, as Reggie Jackson used to say.
Yeah. Anyway, Dave, plug away, man. What you got going on?
Not much, man. Yeah, just trying to come up with content the way we all are, and still recording daily episodes of Locked On Heat. You can always follow me on Twitter at Locked On Heat. Other than that, I'm occasionally writing, not so much as I used to, but still trying to find time.
The writing's gone down a little bit last year.
You know, I've got a one very good reason, and his name is Jacob Ramil, my toddler son. So
that's right.
Yeah, he is a full-time job plus one, so it's a lot. I don't know how you do it, man. You're a good man to be able to handle 2 of them, I'll tell you.
Yeah, well, we're done. No more kids. That's it. Wife and I agree to that. No more kids. We're done. So
yeah.
Anyway, Dave, we'll talk soon. Let's hope it's not making another year again. Okay.
No, absolutely. And I've got to return the favor. You got to come on the podcast soon and talk.
Let me know, brother. All right, buddy. Take care.
All right, take care.
You got it. Bye. Thank you.